advantage of that. And since the president is in Japan, he pointed out that as a country, we can learn from Japan on matters development. To support his sentiments, he pointed out how Japan collects more than Kenya in relation to GDP. Take a listen.
Japan, their tax as a percentage of GDP is at 34.8%. In Kenya, we are at 15, less than half what it is here. If we have to develop our country, Kenyans must roll up their sleeves and develop their country. Our country is not going to be developed by others. Our country is not going to be developed by aid. Our country is not going to be developed by debt. Our country is going to be developed by us. Japan is built by the Japanese using their own taxes. Kenya will be built by Kenya using our own revenues and our own taxes. That is a statement that we must tell each other. The one thing that I have committed myself to do is that we must then provide a guarantee that every Kenyan who pays for whatever service or pays whatever tax, that money should not be stolen by anybody. So long as we collect whatever tax we are collecting and we use it to grow our country, it is going to benefit us eventually. The one thing we must never do, and I will not do as president, is to say that there will be free lunch, that the country is going to be developed by borrowing money from other people, that the money is going to, that Kenya is going to be developed by others, and that it's going to cost us nothing to develop our country. That one I will not do, and I will not encourage you to do. And that is why I don't mind, you know. People call me names. But you see, when you are doing the right thing, your conscience is clear that you are doing the right thing. And I will do the right thing for our country, irrespective of what names people call me, including Zakayo.
All right, talking of Zakayo, he climbed the sycamore tree, and I want us to climb the sycamore tree on matters memory lane, where, just to jog our memories, it's not the first time a head of state has used Japan as an example of right fiscal standing. And why do I say this? Former president in a media roundtable years back, he pointed out the issue of Japan. And this is what he had to say. And he was touching actually not on tax to GDP, but he touched on debt to GDP of Japan. Let's listen.
When you talk about our debt, do you know what the debt of the Japanese government is? Or what is Japan's debt?
I'm not really concerned about Japan.
Do you know what the Kenyan debt is?
Yes.
What is it?
As I said.
What is it?
Right now, some figures at 4.5 trillion shillings.
Don't
4.
talk about, I said, as a percentage of GDP. Talk like an economist.
56% of GDP.
Of GDP?
Yes.
All right?
Yes.
What is Japan's debt?
I'm not in Japan, so I'm not concerned about Japan.
Japan's debt is over 100% of their GDP. Japan. Okay? All right? Because, my friend, the issue of debt is not about incurring debt. It's about how you use that debt. Are you using that debt to expand your economy? Are you using that debt to expand your GDP? Are you using that debt to open up your country?
So there we see two different school of thoughts. First is President William Ruto, and he's noted that the country won't be developed by debt. And he cited a tax to GDP of Japan. But going back, years back actually, the former president noted the debt to GDP, because his sentiment is that debt is not about incurring, because Japanese debt to GDP ratio, it's over, as he puts it, 100%, and it's how you utilize the debt. Two different school of thoughts. And I want to bring in Ken Gishinga in this regard. Our fascination with Japan is quite interesting. Coincidentally, the president is there. But first of all, this difference in ideology, is it clear-cut and different the way we are seeing the former government and the now government operating and carrying out its fiscal responsibilities?
Well, no, let me first start by saying that it's very healthy that our leaders should be able to benchmark with a country like Japan. It's the third largest economy, and it's a country where the citizens enjoy high standards of living. So to be able to aspire to that, I think it's quite noble of the leaders. The only problem is when we make these comparisons, they tend to be very selective. We don't give the full comparison. So President Kenyatta at that time talked about the debt to GDP that Japan has, almost well over 200%, which is true. What he didn't tell you at that time was that most of that debt was in domestic currency, was in the yen currency. So as opposed to Kenya, where half of our debt is in external currency, in dollars. So Japan is not exposed to exchange rate risk much that Kenya is. So that's one element where you see an incomplete comparison. When you come to President Ruto, indeed the tax to GDP collected in Japan is 35%. That's correct. It's much more significant. But again, he doesn't give you the full picture. When you go to Japan today, VAT is at about 10%. Here in Kenya, VAT is at about 16%. In fact, the proposals are to increase it to 18%. So that's the challenge and I think this is where the Council of Economic Advisors should be able to support in saying, yes, it's good to compare with Japan, but let's give the full comparison. Let's not just cherry pick some ratios and sort of leave it at that.
And Professor Olwenyi, it raises fundamental questions in regards to how does a country develop? That's been that's the foundational issue here. One leader believes we can borrow and utilize debt to develop. Another leader believes that we have it within our capacity as a country to pay taxes and develop. Now, in the School of Finance and Economics, do these marry well, or are things, different, as it is said, kwa ground vitu ni different?
Yes, Noah, the truth is that for a country to develop, the people in that country are the ones to work to develop the country. They have to work in terms of their culture. When you go to Japan, the public sector is actually the best sector. Many private sectors are actually looking forward to the public sector because it is a stronger sector. Then it has got to do with the culture of the people. When you go to Japan, they take something and look at how they can make it better. They might not really have innovated it, but they look at how to better that thing. So the truth is that for an economy to develop, the people in the country must work. As per the words of the president, that's true. But then the next thing is we have to eliminate negative culture. When you go to Japan, corruption is not a culture of the Japanese. And when people are not able to do work, they leave that work, they resign. Here, we can have people who cannot do work, but they keep on working, they keep on being in the payrolls, and they cannot work. And at the end of the day, the work ethic is actually not providing development. So we have to change in terms of the work ethic. It is us as people to develop our own nation. But as we make the comparisons, let us also look at our state, where we are. Just as has been highlighted by Ken, when you look at the debt status of Japan, it is in the form of the yen. But us, we are looking at debt in a foreign country, foreign currency, which is keeping on being volatile, escalating. Like right now, we are going to pay almost more. Our debt has gone up by about 450 billion. just because of the fact that it's in a dollar currency. So I think the question of economic development has got to do with the people from within the country to fold their sleeves and do the work, change their culture, change their mentality, choose to behave in a right manner in terms of eliminating corruption and integrity, choose to be honest. When you look at even children in Japan, there is honesty valued as opposed to ours. Okay. So we must inculcate the right culture for us to develop.
And now we are starting to, I wouldn't say veer off, but we are bordering philosophy. And Ken, I want to bring you in on this in regards to when you talk about changing a country and changing a whole culture. Prof has mentioned the issue of corruption, and the president was very bold there. I wouldn't allow anybody to steal, but you know, in the country we know what happens in this particular country, honestly speaking. So how do you inculcate values? What can we learn from the Japanese and globally? How to inculcate values that could sort of be buffers to avoid some of these externalities that sort of hinder actual and wholesome development of this country?
Well, Noah, if you were to go to Japan in the mid-1940s, towards the end of the Second World War, they were absolutely, the society was almost broken by those bombs that were dropped by the Americans. Indeed, everything had come to ground zero, and Japanese society really had to start again, really building principles, building new philosophies. So when you hear some of these common philosophies people talk about, things like ikigai, these are philosophies that have been developed that are bordering on what Prof has said, a very strong work ethic, virtues in the public service, indeed commitment, integrity, honor. Those are values that have been inculcated through the education system, which is one way, but also through the family network and through mentorship. And it's a way that Kenya can be able to challenge itself. Imagine a country that almost was at ground zero 70 years ago is now the third largest economy in the world. So it tells us we have everything it takes to be a first world country, but we have to be able to organize all our factors of production in a way that we can be a country that produces Toyotas, produces all this advanced equipment that Japan produces.
Definitely. Can you remind me of, there was a time like Kipia County produced a car, and Kenyans dissed that car online, if you can remember. Yeah, they were like, what's happening? Because back in the day, there was also was it the Nyayo car? If I'm not wrong. Yeah? What is the name? Yes.
Nyayo Pioneer.
Yes. And I don't know, was it too heavy? I don't know what happened in that regard, but I want to bring in Prof. Prof, there is the element that Ken has mentioned about inculcating these values, developing philosophies. I remember back in the day, I think a couple of years back, I was doing a story on retirement, and I was talking to one of the former PCs, Nyaguthi, and he was talking about national values. Like a Kenyan cannot articulate clearly what are our national values as a people. It's not as clear as it should be. That's one. So is this change bottom up in accordance to the government of the day, or can there be goodwill from people in positions of power and that goodwill to trickle down? What is the most effective way to go about this, Prof?
No, one of the things that we must do is in our education system. We have a current system called CBC. We must look at this CBC in terms of how it can bring in right values like honesty, integrity, and hard work, Then once we've been able to do it through our education system, we go to our structures, the structures that we have in the country, and reform, as it were, all of them. There are heavy words that the president has spoken. The only thing is that if they materialize is when we can actually say something has changed. Go to our institutions and purge them so that we can actually have structures that are not having corruption in it. Because if it is having corruption, it's like you have a vessel, but it has got dregs. It cannot allow water to move. It cannot allow things to move through it. So we must put some energy and effort sufficient to clean our institutions and our structures. Then now, the other thing has got to do with our leaders. From the top going down, the leaders must also change in terms of how they handle themselves. Because you see, if you are a leader, you need to lead by example. So all our leaders at all levels should actually lead by example, so that we can actually remove anything that probably will actually take us back. So the right way to change culture is the leaders, the institutions, the education system, so that we have the future generation moving in the right direction. Noah, that's
Definitely.
my submission.
Oh, thank you very much. I like it when you finish with, that is my submission. What a powerful way. It's so academic, Prof, yeah? That is my submission. It reminds me of those vetting days when they were vetting cabinet secretaries. I think the one that stood out was the cabinet secretary now for Treasury. He kept on saying, you know, my academic background forces me to teach you guys about this and that, and why I'm passionate about markets, which is kind of interesting. But right now, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, since we are done with the Japanese situation, now I want us to come back home and the reality of home. And the CBR has been raised to 13%. What are the implications of that? Where do we stand on matters, Eurobond and repayment? I know we've touched a little bit on the international financial markets and how they are opening up. Is Kenya going back out there? And what will this portend in the debt discussion? But now, Business Today takes a short break. We'll return with more.